fear, it's a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have a really fun show today. It's an amazing show, actually, where we're going to tell a story of cosmic catastrophe from beginning to end. And it's a story that I don't think you've ever thought could be possible. And we have my lovely partner, Leah, joining us.
Hello, it's good to be back.
How are you doing today?
I am well, thank you. Yourself?
Excellent. So today's episode is episode number 4, and it is entitled The Serpent Mound and the Hopewell Airburst. Now, this story begins hundreds of millions of years ago when a very large comet or asteroid struck southern Ohio. And we'll get to that at the end of the story. But it just so happens that the Serpent Mound, which is very famous, and for the people watching, we'll bring it up.
Yeah.
Serpent Mound, here we are. Now, this is a very old-timey picture, one of the oldest pictures of Serpent Mound, but this is part of the mound building cultures. If you're out there listening, you never heard of the mound builders, there were cultures in the eastern U.S. thousands of years ago that built some of the largest earthworks on Earth. And this one, Serpent Mound, is no different. It is also known as the Great Serpent Mound, and we can look at it from above here. It is an archaeological and historic site located in Peebles, Ohio. It encloses this effigy that you're looking at, which is 1,348 foot long in the shape of a serpent. It is, in fact, the largest effigy mound of a serpent in the entire world. And it was thought to be built, and for decades, everyone was taught just 800 years ago. But there has been some progress here. There's a new paper that came out this year, or this is 2017, actually, that radiocarbon dates the Serpent Mound to what I believe is a more logical time, and that is 320 BC. And the reason I say that is because, and this is the funny thing, right next to Serpent Mound, they found burials, ancient Indian burials of Adena people. And the Adena people lived at this time. Why they said it was 1,000 years younger is anyone's guess. But so Serpent Mound is over 2,000 years old. You have anything to add?
No, I don't really at this point.
So we have this 2,000-year-old mound. Now, what's interesting, the geology connects it to an impact. For those of you that don't know, serpent effigies like Serpent Mound are typically associated with, in this case, a whole bunch of different legends about the fertility and the egg and the snake eating the egg and the spiral we see in petroglyphs. But there's so much going on this mound. Each of the curves in the serpent points to either the equinox or the solstice. So it has all of the solstice markers and the equinoctial markers in the bends. And if you go from the center of the spiral through the triangle, it's true north. And then if you go through the triangle through the egg, it's pointing again to the summer solstice sunset. So there's so much going on this serpent that these people thousands of years ago were archeoastronomers. Now, the breakthrough that's more mind-blowing is the fact that Serpent Mound is on an impact structure. They built Serpent Mound inside of a massive, miles-wide impact structure that's hundreds of millions of years old. So do these natives, do they have geologists on site? What do you think?
Right. Well, I mean, it is really sort of confusing, isn't it? Because you've got this ancient impact site with this effigy, I guess, of some sort, or as you pointed out, that it's astronomical as well. I can't say that word today for some reason. But then
Archeoastronomical.
thank you, archaeoastronomical, and then that this Hopewell airburst happens as well. It just all seems very strange and coincidental, don't you think?
Yeah, well, we'll get to the Hopewell airburst. Let's start
Sure.
at the beginning here. 2,000 plus years ago, let's say it's the Adena people that decide to build this serpent that's archaeoastronomical on this impact structure. Could this be an accident?
Well, right. Isn't it accident? And why did they pick a serpent?
Well, if they're building it where a giant comet hit, that they would be representing that with the comet effigy of the serpent. And then they put all the other stuff in it and they make it an observatory, perhaps, because they know of some coming catastrophe that happens regularly. And they need the observatory to study the precession of the equinoxes through this thing.
Sure. But obviously that suggests that there was some body of knowledge that was transferred from people to people over a very long period of time, because the impact is millions of years old, correct?
Yeah, the impact is date. I don't have the date up here. I don't know if I pulled the paper up. Let me real quick look around here.
I think I had a date somewhere that I saw.
Yeah, it's definitely hundreds of millions of years old. I think they have it at 322 or something.
So yeah, so how did these people know what this was?
Yeah,
short of transferring the knowledge from generation to generation, how did they know?
Well, there were no people around 300 million years ago. So I think there was actually, if they have archaeoastronomers here and they have people making these amazing effigies as a solar observatory, they have a geologist on hand that knew, because they know the land, he knew this was a giant impact structure.
It must be.
Yeah.
It must be.
Absolutely fascinating.
Just really fascinating.
Now, the recent radiocarbon dating from Herman et al. 2014 found that Serpent Mound was likely built in the early woodland period. This is the most recent paper coming out on the dating, and that puts it at 320 BC. Mm-hmm. And the study also suggested that the effigy was repaired and or restored in the Fort Ancient times. And that's how they got the more recent dates. So this paper also explains why they dated it wrong, because another culture hundreds of years later came in and then used it again.
Isn't that funny how that keeps happening?
Yeah.
We see the same thing in Egypt, right? Or it would seem that way, that Egyptian pyramids and the Sphinx, et cetera, were built long before the commonly accepted Egyptians found it. But that's funny how that works.
So here we got a map up. It shows the Adena culture, and they basically are around the Great Lakes region. And then the Hopewell sphere of influence is almost all the way out past the Mississippi. It goes right out to the Central Plains. And this is a time around 2,000 years ago. Oh, what was that a shot of? Yeah, so we'll get to the Hopewell airburst. Here, let's talk about the Serpent Mound impact structure now. So what we've come up with here is that a culture could have either accidentally built Serpent Mound in a giant impact structure, which I don't believe is possible, or they had a geologist on hand that was well aware that this is one of those places and we revere it, and let's put this thing on top here. So what they found is located in Adams, Highland Pike, Tri-County area in Ohio, is one of only 28 confirmed impact craters in the United States. So this is, has good science behind it. It's confirmed to be a large impact structure. And it's known as the Serpent Mound impact structure. because Serpent Mound was discovered before we discovered the impact structure. So that means that the natives might be smarter than us.
Well, here's another question too. If they knew this was an impact structure, and perhaps in your culture you have some narrative about things falling from the sky, I'm not really sure why you would put your effigy inside the impact structure. That seems a little dangerous. Unless you're relying on the idea that the chances of something impacting that same spot again are very slim.
Yeah, you would have to have the knowledge that this impact structure is extremely ancient and that no one on Earth knew about it, and they discovered it.
Yeah.
Because the dating, and the recent dating, I have it here, is that the comet struck Ohio between 256 and 330 million years ago.
Hmm.
And that is pretty interesting.
Well, it's really cool, too, that when you read that apparently there are artifacts that were found that were made out of meteorite material as well. Oh, well, that's more related to the Hopewell impact structure, I assume. Not so much.
That comes much later.
Okay. So none of that was built out of similar material. Well, because how would they have found the material? It would have been long buried by then.
Yeah, it's hundreds of millions of years old. There is no material.
Yeah.
And the reason this is dated to such a wide range is because there is miles of earth that has been eroded. This is the deep expression of what an impact on the surface would be like miles down. Because it's so old, it has eroded deep into the depths of the impact structure. So what you just get here is kind of jumbled. The sedimentary rocks are just slightly jumbled and fractured.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a very deep and old impact structure, and they built Serpent Mound on the outer edge, but inside of the impact structure. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And we can go over here. These are the astronomical alignments that I was pointing out. So the head points directly to the summer solstice sunset. From the spiral through the edge of the triangle here is true north. And then we have summer solstice sunrise, equinox sunrise, and the winter solstice sunrise.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so do they build this over it has to take a year because they have to have all these spots. It's fascinating.
It is really fascinating.
It says the head of Serpent Mound is lined up to a point on the western horizon where the sun sets on the summer solstice. So this must have been an observatory for many years where they're putting up rocks or something and they're determining what's going on before you make the mound.
Yeah.
It's a whole process.
It's like a giant art installation in a way. And I keep wondering, was there a purpose to the mound beyond the archaeoastronomical aspects?
Well, yeah, because, these cultures don't have written language. This is the written language. This is the library. This is newspaper rock in a certain sense, where if you were to bring your children or your family here and spend a few days and walk them through the significance, or perhaps come here during these solstice sunrises, and it's like a church.
Do you know were there glyphs found here?
There are very few petroglyphs in these areas because it rains there. So most things are weathered, and this is on top of a mesa. So you see here, it's all grass. There's no like rock.
Right, there's not a lot of exposed rock and such.
There is actually down here along the inside the crater rim. Okay. See how there's a field off to the left here? Yeah. So this is actually up on a high plateau that does have some outcrops here. What's more important is that I wish I pulled a picture up. Serpent Mound is down there in those valleys, is completely surrounded by creeks. So there is a full circumferential creek system that surrounds the entire effigy, as if
that may help
water
explain,
may be significant.
Sure. So that might help explain also why they picked this particular spot in the crater.
Yeah, because of the water.
Right. And are there remains of people living in this area? Archaeological remains, I mean,
Yeah,
evidence.
you have all three cultures that existed during this time. The earliest being the Adena, which would be the 300 BC people that created it. And then they're followed by the Hopewell are the final stage. And then there's a stage in between, which, if there it is, is called the Fort Ancient.
Oh,
So the
right.
Fort
Yes.
Adena first, then the Fort Ancient, then the Hopewell.
Is the claim that these are different people?
Yeah, and it's the same problem with Clovis points and Folsom points.
Right.
So these are the same people that are showing cultural changes 3 times.
Right.
And then the final hurrah, which we'll get to after the break, the Hopewell Airburst. Shortly after the Hopewell Airburst, the Hopewell go away. And all the mound builders disappear after that airburst, never to be seen again. So, and that happens around 400 AD. So the entire span of these mound builders in this area is only 700 years.
Yeah.
It's like they show up out of nowhere. They shift 3 different times. In 700 years, they become 3 different cultures doing the same exact things on the same exact mounds. And then after a comet explodes over the exact area that they put Serpent Mound on, an ancient comet impact eliminates them. It's like, this is a science fiction book.
It totally is. I mean, I said it earlier in the show, didn't I? That, like, you know, the chances of that happening are so incredibly slim. So you could argue that there would be no reason to hesitate to put your Serpent Mound inside the crater, but it actually did happen again. It's almost as if they were
700 years later, it happened after they did the mound.
I mean, were they trying to generate that?
Oh, and that is what we could get into now. So is this them manifesting their own future somehow?
Right.
You know, because if you think about something long enough, you tend to surround yourself with people that are like-minded and you move in the direction of what you're thinking.
Right. Well, and it's almost as if, you know, they put this mound here for a reason to track perhaps some kind of regularly occurring event, like a comet coming by. I mean, it's almost as if that's why it's there. But
yeah,
again,
you would want to know when the autumnal equinox is.
Right.
Because shortly after that is when the comets come.
Right.
And
right.
we had an example. I sent you over that video this morning.
Yeah.
So we had a large bolide enter our atmosphere and strike the surface, perhaps. It struck in Northern California near Redding, and it might have lit the forest on fire. This is like corroborating everything we've been talking about.
I heard it actually landed in the ocean, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, early on, there was a fire lit at the same time of the bolide, and people were speculating it might have been a piece of that.
Yeah, I think somebody determined that it wasn't, but I don't know how accurate that is.
And I also heard that it went through a house.
What?
Yeah, on one of the accounts.
Huh.
So it might have broken up into multiple pieces.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's from the Taurid meteor stream, which peaks, the one stream peaks on the 4th, which was yesterday when that hit.
Yeah.
And then the next peak is coming up on the 14th. But at any moment, you can be hit by a bolide from the Taurids.
Sure. Apparently.
Yeah. And so
but
maybe
again,
these.
No,
go ahead.
If Serpent Mound was built in order to predict this, you know, how did they know what the periodicity was or when it was coming? And I mean, you'd have to assume at that point that there's some connection to the crater that they're in, but which is still mind-boggling, you know, absent of a geologist, like you said.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't connect the giant impact with this particular meteor stream, and they knew it was an impact. So that's why they put the observatory up there, the one that they're using for their own cometary observations. And so it all makes sense. Like, where would you put, if you're a native culture, where would you put your shrine to look for comets better than in a crater that was formed from an impact?
Right.
It makes practical sense in my mind that a culture like this would do it that way.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, though, like one question that I would have would be, would there be any just general advantage to building a structure like this inside a crater, even if you didn't know what the crater was? You know, like kind of like choosing to build something on a south-facing slope because it's warmer, stuff like that.
Well, maybe they were smart enough to be like, oh, this is where an impact happened. Another one's never going to happen here.
Right. Right.
Best place to put it is someplace that already got hit.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it's still here. Over 2,000 years later, it's the same. It hasn't changed much.
Okay, so here's another question, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe you do, and I don't know if the dating is that accurate, but do we think Serpent Mound was built? We think it was built before the Hopewell Airburst. Oh, right, of course, because the Hopewell are gone after the Airburst.
There's no more mound builders after the Airburst.
Right.
It is literally the end of the mound builders. Now the question becomes, how early back do the mound builders go?
Right.
Yeah. So they were dating this mound to 1,600 years ago for a while because of the Fort Ancient culture, and they found evidence at that time of fires and this Fort Ancient culture and their lithics associated on the mound and in the mound. And so they assumed that the Fort Ancients built it. But upon more research, they found even older Adena in the mound. And then they said, oh, all these cultures kept fixing it and rebuilding it and being here.
Gosh, like, why was it so important to these people?
Yeah, interesting. And it's in such a place you'd never be able to find it unless you knew where it was, because the area is flat there. This is the highest area. You'd have to have an airplane to find it or know where it is. And the chances of you accidentally rediscovering it seem zero.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that it's surrounded by 3 creeks. And these are ancient native streets. Creeks are streets and rivers. That's how you move around. So maybe they knew that people would find it because there's water on all sides and people are going to come. This is where they're going to hunt.
Yeah.
Someone's going to go up here and discover it again.
It almost has like a Chaco feeling in a way, right? Being like a point where people gather almost. Yeah,
but it's interesting that we don't find any of the ceremonial circular kivas.
Sure.
With these cultures.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't suggesting that it was part of that culture, but just in terms of being like a gathering spot almost because of the creeks. Well, I mean, we're just hypothesizing here and speculating, but.
And in fact, the Hopewell in 400 AD, where did they go?
Right.
Because about 500 years after that, we've got huge cities out here in the Southwest. Did people migrate out to the Southwest after this event?
It's a good question.
Yeah, because this is some pretty old stuff here. So we've got 3 cultures that seem to be living around, and this is not the only mound. Here's where it gets a little crazier, and we'll get to that after the break, that one of the mound building cultures actually built, and we'll get to some of the science in the second half. They actually were able to map where the Hopewell Airburst occurred in Ohio, and it's very nearby this Serpent Mound. It's in southern Ohio, but they were also able to calculate the angle and the trajectory it came in. And right at that area, there's a huge mound site that has what appears to be a serpent effigy. Let me see if I can find it real quick before we get to break. No, not a serpent. So here's some of the mounds that are in there, but one of them has, and I'll definitely pull this up here, right there, a comet here
Right.
in the mound, which is in the exact same trajectory that we just calculated the object came in at.
Yeah.
These
Really,
people.
they must have been calling it in. I don't get it.
But how? But no one can see this unless they're up in the sky.
Well, that's another issue.
Who are they telling in the sky about this airburst?
Right. Like, what's going on here?
Or are they thinking like, well, in the future, we're going to have airplanes?
Right.
Or did they have the ability to astral travel, some of them, and actually fly?
Well,
In a sense.
perhaps if this is, let's say, some kind of celebration of cosmic events, and it's sort of religious in that fashion, if let's say comets are being amounted to as gods or some such, then perhaps it's for their view.
Up. And there's the commercial break. All right, we'll be back in a few minutes. Remember to support the #1 listener-supported radio station, Revolution Radio, on the internet, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. #1 is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. #2 is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. #3, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. #4 is Advanced Ancient Global Civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
I love that fake audience.
You do.
And we're back with the second half of Serpent, Mound, and the Hopi Airburst, and we're going to roll right in to the Hopi Airburst story. So let's start sharing, shall we? All right, so we're back here at the picture of what is called the Milford Earthworks. But first, if you didn't know, the Ohio River Valley has tons of earthworks, not just the Milford Earthworks, not just Serpent Mound, but here's over a dozen. And so these earthworks are all extremely complex, and they're archeoastronomical in many cases, where the squares or the circles are pointing towards equinoctial markers. And so this culture was very interested in the heavens.
Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating too that it's like connected to their structures.
Yeah, well, the Milford is unique in that it is literally the closest to where the airburst happened. So of course this is going to be the Comet Airburst Mound area.
Sure.
And this is when after they did the study, which just came out. And let's pull that out and see what the title is and the date. The Hopewell Airburst event, 1699 to 1567 years ago. And that is published this year.
Huh.
That's amazing. So they went to all these earthwork sites because there's archaeological digs there that they were able to sample. They were able to sample the ground at these sites, and they all found this charcoal layer and this burned layer at all the sites. And then they looked for, just like they looked for in the Younger Dryas, they looked for all the cosmogenic markers, platinum and beryllium.
Yeah.
And then they were able to get a picture, a 3D picture of where the airburst happened.
Yeah. And unlike Younger Dryas, all of these sites are actual. The charcoal layer is really charcoal. It's an indication of burning rather than wet vegetation like it is in Younger Dryas sometimes.
Yeah. And they also found microspherules.
Yes.
And all the other cosmogenic markers. They even found the largest dip in carbon-13, and that would happen during the airburst event. And then to put this into context, at the time frame of the airburst in the range, there were 69 near-Earth comets at the time, including Halley's Comet, which made a close flyby in 374 CE, Common Error. And that falls right in the middle of their range. So they literally might have been taken out by Halley's Comet or a piece of it.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Now, what's more interesting is what archaeologists have found. And this is prior to them determining that this is actually an area where a comet exploded, probably over the ground, because there's no impact structure here.
Yeah.
There's just massive burning and the cosmogenic markers of something happening. So even if it was like a plasma discharge event, we would have a connection on the ground and something visible. There is none of that.
Yeah.
But archaeologists have found that the Ohio Hopewell collected the meteorites from the airburst, and they forged them into jewelry and even pan flutes. They made flutes out of it.
I think that is so fascinating. I was even wondering, because apparently some of the microspherules, they can be kind of on the large side, like, around like 5 millimeters on the large end. And I thought, I wonder if anybody was like making beads out of those.
Absolutely.
It's
you have to see, just Google Hopewell meteorite jewelry.
It's so cool.
I could even pull some of that up. So they were making pan flutes. Now, I don't know if you know, those are big. And jewelry, so there must have been lots of this material after the airburst.
Yeah, well, and I'm also seeing too that they often hammered the material to flatten it, and then they used it to make musical instruments and jewelry, so it doesn't have to be that large.
Yeah, so then that it has to be clearly that this was an iron meteorite that came in and discharged above the surface. Like all the things we're seeing, all the objects coming in now are discharging above Earth. They typically don't hit. Pieces hit after it explodes.
Yeah.
They rain down. So, and this is no different. An iron meteorite exploded above the surface and littered the ground with iron.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the 69 comets that were seen, that was stretched over like a period of like 300 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, it goes from, let's pull that graph up.
There it is.
Right
no.
there.
Yeah.
It goes from around 200 to 600.
Okay.
And we're talking the range of the Hopewell Airburst is somewhere in here where the Halley's Comet comes in.
This has got to be like a comet revering culture. If you're watching this over hundreds of years happening again and again.
Right. And then, the Serpent Mound predates all of this by a few 600 years earlier.
Oh, that's even more fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. This is like a comet culture.
Yeah.
That gets taken out by a comet.
The irony is amazing. Well, and I just find it very interesting too, because, when we talk about Younger Dryas and we talk about what the Clovis might have seen and the result of that, right? The Clovis getting wiped out and then they're no longer in the areas where they were before. You would think that future generations would be very afraid of comets because of things like that, unless they don't have the background knowledge. Because they didn't have communication with those people at any point. But it seems like I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah. Well, and then so let's say it was when Halley's Comet came, and this was a piece of Halley's Comet, which is around 374. In just 25 years, the Hopewell are gone. Yeah. One generation. And so the conclusions here, and I tend to lean towards agreeing with this. Tankersley, who's co-authored this study, said that this type of cosmic event is called an airburst because a comet or meteorite explodes high in the Earth's atmosphere instead of striking the surface. Now, these airbursts create immense heat and release shock waves and then shower micrometeorites into the ground. And that is the chemical fingerprint they used in the study. But cosmic events like these would decimate the population. An airburst would have wreaked havoc on the Earth. We know about the Tunguska event. So think of that. All the trees would be laid down. Many of the people would have been initially taken out. And so it would be very likely that, and then all the animals and the hunting and the agriculture, the soil and the ground would be toxic. The runoff would be bad. So you couldn't stay there. You would wither away or escape. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it almost looks as if people were revering whatever they were seeing in the sky. So maybe there were airbursts that were not, well, is that possible for an airburst to be not as close and to not create this kind of devastation? I don't know.
Well, it could have happened like 2 miles from the village.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
You could have watched the nuclear bomb from 7 miles and not die from the shock.
Right.
You're not going to stay there.
Right. I mean, and I say I'm running with this assumption of these people revering these phenomena simply because they're making jewelry out of the remnants of airbursts. It's just crazy that ultimately it took them out.
Yeah.
Almost as if they didn't understand how dangerous it was, but I don't want to make that assumption. That's assuming that people were stupid or not as observational or something, and I'm not going to make that assumption because that's rather biased.
Here in the actual paper, it says comets are dirty, fractured snowballs.
I know, I read that.
Composed of dust and frozen gas. Well, where did all the metal come from? I mean,
exactly
they contradict themselves. And the stuff on the ground was iron.
I had the same thought when I read that sentence. Where did the meteorites that are on the ground come from then?
Yeah. There are some people stuck in their ways that it's crazy.
Yeah. Well,
Now,
to be fair, doesn't that sentence actually mention that there's like meteorite material in there as well? Yeah, frozen gases and meteoroids.
yeah, so
they're
a comet
basically
has some
claiming that
meteoroids stuck together. Yeah.
right, it's just some like weird conglomerate of random stuff and ice and rocks and shit.
Yeah, so there is archaeological evidence of ancient cosmic impacts from all over the world. It's not just unique to the Hopewell, and they have been recovered from archaeological sites of all types of ages in Europe, in the Near East, in China. And in the Western Hemisphere, Hopewell archaeological sites in the Ohio River Valley contain anomalously high concentrations and diversity of meteorites when compared to all other cultural periods. So what is included here at the site are iron meteorites, and they get specific: ataxites, hexahedrites, and octahedrites, stony iron meteorites, mesositerites, and pallasites, and stony meteorites, which are olivine hypersthene chondrites. So whatever came in might not have been one thing.
Yeah.
But it's contained to a very small area.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it again, the way we were talking about the toroids before, as if the toroids are the remnant of a comet that at some point broke up and continues to cycle through the universe. I mean, this kind of has a similar flavor, talking about, 69 comets in 400 years. And then, well, I mean, I guess then though, but as you point out, by reading that sentence, there's a lot of different materials in here.
Yeah, so they initially thought, wait for it, that the spatial distribution, contexts, and diverse composition of the Hopewell meteorites was explained through acquisition through long-distance trading and an exchange system and exchange networks of meteorites. I guess that's possible.
It's possible.
But many of the Hopewell meteorites could have resulted from a single cosmic airburst, they say here. Because a large comet could contain a variety of meteoroids with all different elemental and mineralogical compositions. I was unaware of that, so. But when we actually landed on a comet or an asteroid that they thought was a comet, it looked like it had many different types of rocks on it.
Well, and why wouldn't it contain many different kinds of rocks?
Well, because the original idea of a comet was a leftover piece of ice from the beginning of the universe or something ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking more like...
So that piece of ice would collect meteoroids in space. They would all hit it and collect on it for billions of years, and then it would re-enter. But what's probably happening is electrostatic charge in space, because when we look at these comets, they're just electrified asteroids, and they're huge. And it looks like a bunch of stuff is stuck to the surface because it's not falling off. So it's accumulating debris as it moves in its orbit. Anything nearby, like a magnet, keeps getting stuck to it. So it's literally collecting micrometeorites of all different kinds.
Well, and also, don't we have to think about, like, let's say when an airburst actually happens, that the energy that's generated in that is going to create some chemical changes to the material as well, right?
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
Now, genetic analysis demonstrate that modern Native Americans are the direct descendants of the Hopewell. So they did migrate away from this site and become different cultures. So that's kind of interesting.
Yes.
Now, the archaeological hallmarks of the Hopewell, who didn't last that long, included monumental landscape architecture that we've shown you today, or that you're listening to, including the largest geometric earthen enclosure in the world, intricate water management systems, massive burial mounds, and extensive ceremonial centers. Their distinctive symbols include artwork, exotic goods, which have been traced from unprecedented continental distances of more than 2,400 kilometers.
I'd like to know what those are.
Probably beads like from Mexico that ended up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
or feathers or something. So they had one of the widest spread social networks between the time period of 100 BC and 400 CE when they disappeared. So in that short period of time, they were able to traverse from the Atlantic Ocean to the Rocky Mountains and from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, easily trading goods and making exotic products at their villages here in Ohio. And some of their ceremonial centers, which we would consider pyramids or pyramid mounds, were hundreds of hectares. And most of them are missing, have been plowed under. It's unknown how many there are. Now, luckily, I was able to acquire some of the early and best literature. I just showed you one of the books. It's very hard to acquire, but I got all the original drawings from the engineers that drew all these earthworks before people came in and destroyed them.
Yeah.
So we still have that in perpetuity. So that's pretty amazing stuff going on here. We've got a culture that thousands of years ago knew about 300 million year old impact. They then spent years creating the Serpent Mound effigy in this impact structure that's hundreds of millions of years old. And then during the next 1,000 years or so, dozens of comets come in close proximity to Earth. And to end the whole story, at 400 AD or CE, an airburst happens over Ohio, and it wipes out the culture that revered the comets.
It has a bit of a Gobekli Tepe feel, don't you think? It feels like a similar story. Like, I keep thinking that there's something really important buried in the Serpent Mound. I mean, I know there is stuff buried there. There are people buried there. There's artifacts. I don't know what else.
Yeah, a lot of these mounds were haphazardly dug into by equipment in the early 1900s. There were no rules. Like, if you owned a mound on your property, you went in, and they found that this is where they found a lot of the giants. So the Adena people were tall. Not a lot of tall Native Americans.
Know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, a lot of those skeletons have gone missing.
Right.
And what you find in the mounds is almost all the mounds, I remember even studying them as a kid, they had good cross sections of some of the bigger mounds. And there were literally culture after culture after culture doing their burials in different ways and creating this mound and building it up.
Oh, wow. Fascinating.
Yeah. And kind of similar to the way they dig tombs in, let's say, Egypt or something.
Yeah.
Or the way we have, cemeteries. They're burying the people in the same place for some significance. I mean, the practice of burying people goes back to the Ice Age, and probably before that. So, in recent years, we found burial practices with red ochre people and beads that are not completely beaded ornaments over an entire woman's body that's 9,000 years old.
Amazing.
Yeah. So there's a lot we don't know about these people, and this fairy tales that we tell about them continuously get shattered, like pushing the age back here of Serpent Mound this year to the earliest period when this area was occupied that we know of, 2,000 years ago. And so
how tall is Serpent Mound?
You mean on the mesa, or you can see how high it is there. It's only like 4 feet, 5 feet high.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was wondering if some of it had, if there was some erosion that was accounted for here or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2,000 years of erosion.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely stood the test of time. And then there's a lot more to Serpent Mound that's now missing. There were other parts of it that weren't able to be preserved. Like most of these earthworks are gone, and they have to use LiDAR to see them.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you, in your little village, you have a team that comes up with the plan on what your earthwork is going to be. I mean, who decides on what goes there?
Right.
Like here's figure 12. There's like some squares and half circles. And I bet you these half circles are all like the curves in Serpent Mound, right? One's pointing towards the equinox or the solstice. And these circles have openings in different positions. Here you see one facing down. This is top right. This one is just to the side.
Well, and again, like who's looking at this from above?
Good question.
Like what?
Who is looking at this from above? All right, so what do we think's happening here?
I don't know. I really don't know. It really feels like a mystery. I mean, we said this already 3 times, but the coincidence, so to speak, of building inside this crater only to be taken out by this airburst later seems to be what you're revering. That's just fascinating.
Yeah, so here's a reconstruction of a giant monumental earthworks at one of the Hopewell sites. They were all directly connected to rivers, just like the Great Pyramids in Egypt were directly connected to the Nile when the Nile was over there. Nile's now 8 miles away from the pyramids, but it once ran right along them. And here you see the giant pyramid right on the river in this reconstruction. Then the massive earthworks and other structures and another ceremonial pyramidal mound inland, which is set up like a typical tabernacle or church within this giant rectangle in the center. And so what is going on here? This is a very highly advanced culture that we certainly don't know anything about.
Yeah, clearly.
And this is happening at the same time of all the great Egyptian dynasties.
Yeah.
And it's well after Göbekli Tepe, so.
Yeah.
But this is showing that these megalithic cultures, even though the megalithic culture here, which could have been the Adena, weren't using stone blocks, they were making megalithic earthworks.
Yes.
And they did not have bulldozers.
Right.
So,
right.
Some of these structures would take decades and thousands of people moving like bundles. It would take years and years to create them.
Right. The assumption is that you have people with baskets carrying dirt, one by one, kind of like how we talk about the pyramids being built by, one rock carried at a time.
Right. And they're all whistling like Oompa Loompas.
Right.
Oompa, Loompa, Doompa dee doo. I've got another basket of mud.
And, and then you're doing all of this knowing that you're not making it out of rock and that it's not going to last nearly as long as it would if it were rock. It's a lot of effort for something that can be seen from above.
For something that can be seen from above. For what purpose are they building it? To be seen from above. The Milford earthwork is the most fascinating. There are some other ones that are they just don't know what they were doing here.
Yeah.
These are all definitely significant celestial markers that they're tying in on the right here with the comet that came in. And if we understood this language, it might say something very significant. So they knew by leaving this here, over a period of a few thousand years, someone's going to find it and decipher it.
Why
you can't just be doing it for your own people, Hey, let's make a giant Earth and Comet Earth for us because it's
for fun.
Cool. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's where I say it appears almost as if like a giant art installation, because it's kind of like, I'm not saying that art doesn't have a purpose, because it certainly does, but it's somewhat limited in its practicality. So it has that same feeling.
Yeah, because
cool,
out
in the
Southwest, there's lots of petroglyphs and pictographs because the cultures here knew what an overhanging rock was. They knew that the patina took hundreds of years to create, And they
Right.
knew that that area was going to be protected for a very long time. So they did all these drawings on the protected cliffs. There's nothing here. It's so wet in Ohio. Even if you found a cliff, it's in a rainforest, and you know what it looks like in Fairmount Park. If we carve something on a cliff there, it's not going to last very long. Lichen and moss will grow over it. So I think this is their type of petroglyphs.
Yeah, I like that idea, that this was the communication method. But again, I'm stuck on, but you have to be looking at this from above.
Yeah.
I mean, someone who's there on the ground that participated in building this can tell you what shape it is, but that's, within the same generation or two, not generations going forward.
So maybe they could talk to the eagles.
Something. I mean, and I said this earlier, maybe they're talking to the comets themselves. Like maybe the comets are the gods and you're talking to the gods this way.
Yeah. I wonder. I wonder. Yeah, I wonder. So it's clear that all these shrines or whatever they're calling them, and you notice that there's always circles involved here, and that Göbekli Tepe is a circle, which we think is some kind of archaeological warning system, right? Archeoastronomical warning system or shrine. And so this is very similar to what they were doing there at Göbekli Tepe, I think. Just not bas relief, these are earthworks.
Yes.
All right, join us next week where we may pick this up or we may not. But thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening.
Radio, if you can. We love you.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.